Okay, this is the valve body out of a 32 RH or 904, depending on what car it came out of. So when you open up the transmission pan, pull it off, you'll see this. Flip it over, and you see all this business. So we're going to disassemble this sucker. The first thing that comes off is the clutch converter module. All these screws are the same, with the exception of the 3 that hold this module down. 2 are long and 1 is shorter, so I want to keep those straight. Now this comes apart really easily. You just slide that off. It's got some valves and stuff inside there, and then you slide that off. Piece of cake, right? Okay. The next thing we do is we're going to separate this valve body from this separator plate from the bottom half of the valve body. And so the way we do that is by removing these screws. Now I've already got them marked as to where they go, and I'll show you in a second how I've done that. I drew a map of the valve body, the back side of that, and I put markings where all the screws go. And I even put other markings where there were holes without screws. So now I know exactly where those go. And so I'm going to take those screws and I'm going to just feed them right into my map here. We'll actually do that, because you may have noticed that not all these holes have screws in them. I don't know if they're supposed to be that way. That's the way mine came. So we're going to put it back the same way. Now when you get to right around this point, you need to start thinking about being careful, because inside here are some check balls that are pretty tiny and they're easy to lose if you're not careful. Alright, so the next thing to do is we're going to separate these two pieces. Now I've seen videos where guys like angle this up and pull it apart, but it's not quite that simple, because there's a filter that we're going to see in a second that makes this job actually a little bit more complicated than you'd expect. However, I forgot this screw. No wait, I don't want to do that screw yet. That's holding the top plate down. So what you do is, missing screw. There we go. Just slide it like this, and it'll come right out. So now you can see here in a second. There's that filter. And that filter goes right down in this little chamber right here. There's really only one place it'll fit. But you don't have to pry it out. You can just rotate it like a piece of cake, right? So here's they call it the transfer plate. We're going to look at that in just 1 second. In the valve body, we have these check balls. Now there's 7 of them, and they're all pretty easy to locate. Everyone talks about how don't lose these, you never know where they go again. No, they're in the factory service manual, and it's actually really easy to identify. There's these areas we call bathtubs. Right here, 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 and there's one that's not exactly a bathtub, and there's another one that's not exactly a bathtub, and there's this one, and then this one here is bigger. And you'll notice it's bigger than all the other channels here, and it takes a bigger check ball. There's no confusing which one is which when it comes to how it all goes. Now I've got a bag for all the different things. In fact, I've got one for the clutch converter module. This is so we don't lose all this stuff. Filter shaft, valve body, check balls, and filter. Okay. So the check balls are really not. A week ago, I would have told you were insane for doing that. But I know where they all go now, so it's not a problem. And there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of those. There's 2 more inside there. We'll get to those in 1 second. I hired a new cameraman. Hopefully the camera's a little more steady than when I have my kids working it. So that's all we're gonna do on this for right now. These pieces are not particularly fragile. I wouldn't just throw them around the room, but you're not gonna hurt them by touching them. I'll take these two screws off here. Now these screws are about, I don't know, 3/8 of an inch or so, and there's a bunch of those. And they are going to be used all over the place. And they're all T25. So we're going to go ahead and put those in my bag there. Okay, so the transfer plate now, the filter actually goes through the transfer plate like this. The filter doesn't even really stay in place by anything. It just got two legs and sort of stands there and passes through that filter. Now there are two more check balls in here. One is right here, and the other one is right here. I don't know if you can see those. This goes right behind the accumulator piston when it's all assembled. But, so the one check ball is right there near this piston area, and the other one is right here. So get those out, put them away, put them in my bag with the filter. Alright, we don't need this again for a while until we reassemble, so let's get this out of the way. Before we get too carried away on this, let's go ahead and disassemble the torque converter clutch module. So you can see this has got a little valve body action here. There's an end plate that holds two valves in. You gotta hold your thumb on this because there's a spring wanting to push this stuff out. So there's the end plate. Here's one valve, a spring, there's another spring, and a valve. Now there's really only one way this stuff can go back in when we go to reassemble it. You can put the small one in the big bore, then the big one doesn't fit in the small bore. Doesn't even fit either way. So there's really no way to mess that up when you're putting it back together. So that's really all there is. Two springs, two valves, and an end plate. So we'll put all that back in here. Okay, next up is the main valve body. And this one, I forgot, I was going to tell you how I kept track of those screws. I drew a map of the valve body, the back side of that, and I put markings where all the screws go. And I even put other markings where there were holes without screws. So now I know exactly where those go. And so I'm going to take those screws and I'm going to just feed them right into my map here. Alright, next we'll disassemble this whole thing. We start with the this particular section here with the selector shaft, and this is the parking rod. And there's a bracket that actually holds some screws, some springs and valves in. Now, there's a couple things we want to be careful about here. This piece and this piece. They're things that we don't really want to touch. One of these is, this one here is the throttle pressure adjuster, and I don't really want to adjust the throttle pressure. And this one is the line pressure adjuster, and I don't want to touch that either. Now, it turns out they're actually really hard to adjust, but I just want to call out that we don't want to mess around with that too much. So, let's start by, this one is a real bugger. Take that screw out. And there's a lot of stuff wanting to push this guy out, so we're going to hold on to it real good. This is far and away the hardest piece to reassemble. So you can see a bunch of stuff flew out. So here is the bracket. This is the line adjuster. That's how it goes back together. This sort of rectangular piece holding that in place. You can see that. And then we're not even going to touch that screw, and this one doesn't even move. So nothing you can do there. We can take it out, take take that section out so we don't lose it later. Okay, so the first thing it's shooting at us is a spring and a valve, which is the, I can't remember what the names of this one are. This is the pressure regulator valve. And these should come out nice and smooth. All right, no problem. Then there is another one, which this spring came out of, and this is called the switch valve. Right. And then there's one more in here, which is a little complicated thing. So there's a valve, there's this sleeve, there's a spring, and there's one more valve in there that really doesn't like to come out very easily. You want to be pretty gentle with if you're going to use something to sort of scoot these things out. As I pound it with my hand. I got it out one time before. Really had a hard time with it. It looks like I'm going to have a hard time again. Oh, there we go. There we go. There we are. So, we'll put those in. All right. Now, the next piece is actually really a pain in the butt, and I don't have the special tool, and I've done it before, but I'm not going to demonstrate it for the video. But that is this shifter. There's a detent ball in here, if you can see that right here. You can see that right here. That detent ball has a real big spring behind it, or real strong, I should say strong. It's not very big, but it's strong. And if we take this thing off, the spring is going to shoot that detent ball across the room. So there's a special tool that compresses this thing in. I was able to do it with a feeler gauge, one of the thickest feeler gauges, and hold it in. I'm not willing to go through that exercise again to take that piece out. So we're not going to demonstrate that piece. Okay, next up is the shuttle end plate. There's nothing underneath this except more valve body. There's no springs or anything like that. There's really nothing to worry about opening this up. Nothing there. Even on the back side. It's just machine steel. Okay? Which leaves us with this section. That parking rod is really kind of a pain in the butt, and if you take this section off, the parking rod comes with it. But I've learned to deal with it. Woo. Oh, I caught it too. I dropped it. Now there are, geez almighty, there are spring loaded valves behind this plate. So we need to be a little careful. Let me open this one up. More careful than I've been so far. So keep pressure on this plate as you take it off. Now, they're not going to come flying across the room, but you don't want to lose it. So there's the end plate, and there is two, they call them governors. This is that's the 1-2 governor plug, and this is the 2-3 governor plug. Set those there. Now there's another valve inside here, but it doesn't come out this way. It comes out in a more complicated way. We can push this a little bit. We can't get it all the way out because the spring, if you can see this, the spring bottoms out. Okay. It's because there's a C-clip on the end of this spring. And so what we have to do is compress this compress the spring. Oh, actually, I don't need to compress the spring. We just get the E-clip off. I may have said C-clip a moment ago. I meant to say E-clip. There we go. So there's the E-clip. And now we can push this all the way through. This little cap comes off. This is called the shuttle valve throttle plug. That's what that is. There's a spring that sits in that. And then there's the valve, which sits on the other end of this spring. Now the spring has these two plastic guides, two yellow guides on either side. Those are important. And then the valve itself should come out nice and easily. There we go. There's the valve. So that's all there is to do to take apart that. And that is the governor plug end plate. It's figure 53 in my factory service manual. I'll put the figure number for the ones that I thought that were extra complicated or confusing or didn't know what they were called very well. Alright, next up is we're going to do this piece, which is the kickdown valve body. It actually comes off in two pieces. I don't think this one is spring loaded underneath, but maybe it is. It feels like it is. This one also takes slightly longer screws because it has to go through that whole end plate and valve body. So the end plate up here. So here is the kickdown valve body, which has a plug in it right here, and it's got another valve that sits in here. Now this is not, it's a little bit tricky to put back together. It's very easy to disassemble. There, you just slide this bracket, this little thing, just slide it out of the grooves. But beware, there's a spring on the other side of it. So when you pull it out, make sure the spring doesn't go flying. So there we go. So there's the bracket, or the clip, I guess. Focus. Maybe.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. There's the clip, the spring, and an itty bitty valve. Now, there are three other valves inside this, and the names are a little bit confusing. The first one is called the 1-2 shift control valve, and it's got a spring, and a valve. And then there is the this is the 1-2 shift valve, which has a spring and a valve that doesn't want to come out. Let's get this other one out first because it wants to come out. So this other one is the 2-3 shift valve. Does it not have a spring? Oh. Yes. Does have a spring. Okay. There we go. And there's that other valve. So just like that, all three valves, all three springs. Okay. Shift valves, also part of figure 53. All in here. And then all these little parts. And then I put these screws in here with this, since they're special screws, special length. Okay, one more piece. And this is the line pressure plug. This one is also spring loaded behind it, so we gotta be careful when you take it out. And it's small, so you can't really use a lot of fingers to hold it. So again, we got an end plate, and we've got all sorts of stuff. I think there's one more thing in here. Nope, ends with a spring. Okay, so the spring goes in first, and then there's this little valve with a nub on it, and it goes in the spring. And then there's this, they call this a sleeve, which is hollow, it's got a hole in it. And then inside that is this little guy, which is the line pressure plug. I don't really understand how this works, but it's tiny, and I wouldn't want to lose it. But it goes back together like that. So, I've got one more bag that I'm missing. Well, I'll find my bag for that. But anyway, that's how all this comes apart. And now, with the exception of the selector shaft, which is really nothing to here, we've got this entire valve body disassembled. Really quite simple. It's just a bunch of screws and keeping track of all the little parts. All right, thank you.